everybody. Chris with Microsoft here with another exciting episode of Let's Tech. Today we're going to be talking about Azure, and specifically we're going to be talking about how you can use Azure to follow on with some of the stuff that I've done in some of my previous videos with HyperV Replica. HyperV Replica, if you haven't watched those videos that I've done, you should probably go do that, just so that you're familiar with the technology. Of course, if you're familiar with the technology, you don't need to go watch the videos, but you get my meaning, right? For those of you, just a quick review. Obviously, Replica is not an HA solution. It's not high availability. It's about disaster recovery and business continuity. It's your DR solution, right? This is a way for you to take a VM that's really important to you, that's running on Hyper-V, and send it to another Hyper-V server in theoretically your disaster recovery center, data center. Right, so that at any given time you can go out, make the decision, hey, crumbling pile of ashes in the primary data center, we can go ahead and flip the switch and turn on the VMs out there, right? So that's kind of important to be able to get your stuff back online, and this is a free solution, comes with Hyper-V. Probably be the better way to mention it. It's a solution that is built into Hyper-V already. So that's kind of the big stuff there. You configure it per VM. You need 2 sites theoretically to be able to set this up, but I guess you could do it in 1 site. So what if your DR site is non-existent? What if you don't have another site? You're a single data center, or maybe you're just wanting to get your foot into the cloud and you're looking for ways to do it. This is a great way to kind of get started with messing around with Azure and some of the the management interfaces that you see here in the Azure portal. So what we're going to do today is we're going to do something very similar to those previous demos, where we're going to set up a virtual machine to replicate itself so that you could bring it online in another location. It's just in this case where we're going to bring it online is we're going to bring it online inside of Azure. So in the past, we've always done this configuration from the Hyper-V server, but while Replica is kind of an included feature inside of your Hyper-V installs out there, Replica just kind of comes with it. If you want to replica your stuff out to Azure, you're going to need System Center to do that for the orchestration piece. So that does have a cost associated with it, so that does kind of step that up. Plus, Azure's not free. But if you got the right kind of MSDN subscription, you could definitely test this all day long. That's what I'm using. I'm just using a standard MSDN subscription. Nothing special about my being a Microsoft employee or anything like that. It's just my standard MSDN stuff that I have here, right? So that's another topic we won't get into, which is SCVMM and how to run System Center Virtual Machine Manager. But you can see it's just kind of a nice little place where we can manage all our Hyper-V hosts from one location. So I've got all of my Hyper-V stuff kind of all plugged in together here. So where we start this process is out in the cloud, because the first thing we need to create is called a site recovery vault. And we do that by scrolling down here on the left side and finding this recovery services. We click on it and we say create a new vault. So on this vault options, we have a site recovery vault, which is kind of new. So we're going to go ahead and click on that and click create it. And you'll notice you have some options here as far as where you want that. Pick the closest one. I'm going to pick Eastern US. I've done Western US before. I'm in the middle of the country, so it really doesn't make a lot of difference from my perspective. I'm in Oklahoma, so I'm just as close to either one. And then we just give it a name. So this is a recovery service. So I'm just going to call it Azure Site Recovery Vault. I'm going to call it like 9ZSRV that way. And we'll go ahead and click that, and it's going to go ahead and go through this little process of creating. As you can see, zooming in here, it's creating that site recovery vault for us, and that's going to take a few minutes. And once it's finished, we will have some additional options that will be presented to us. There we can go through and start the process of actually configuring how we're going to link this down to our Hyper-V servers and our System Center Virtual Machine Manager stuff. So that's going to be the next step. We're going to go ahead and click right in here to Azure SRV, our 9Z Site Recovery Vault, and you'll see it's got a nice little handy QuickStart guide. So in the Quick Start guide, we've got a couple of drop-down options. Right. So down at the bottom, newly added, and something we're not going to go into is HyperV on-premises using an array replication. And that's just been added. I don't know a lot about it. Honestly, I haven't even had time to read up on it yet. But you'll see these other two options here. This is between two on-prem HyperV sites and between two on-prem VMware sites. You might be thinking, well, why would I do that? Well, if you do that, then you can manage it from here in Azure in the cloud. Apart from that, you could have your VMware servers and your HyperV servers where you're setting up this stuff for replication and just managing it in Hyper-V, or you could use Azure. That'd be a good way to get started. Well, what we're going to do is this top option. I think this is probably going to be the most popular one, where it says between an on-prem and a Hyper-V site and Microsoft Azure. So if we pick this one, basically what we're saying is I want my production VMs to be on my own personal servers and my own data center. But I also want to be able to fail those over and bring them online inside of Microsoft Azure. So with those different steps, each one changes kind of the what do you, what are your step 1, step 2, step 3 for each of these. For the one we're doing today, which is doing the on-prem to Azure, you'll see the first step is to generate a registration key file. So we're going to generate this file. It literally is just going to come through and give us a little save as here in a second. There it is. So I'm going to go ahead and take that file and I'm going to save it out here. These are my credentials. I'm just going to put it in a folder out here that's easily accessible. And then I'm going to take that folder and I'm going to copy this file that we got. And I'm going to take that over, as you see, prepare your VMM server. That's for my System Center Virtual Machine Manager. So I'm going to jump over to that virtual machine. And we're going to dump that little dude out here on the desktop. You'll also notice in the Getting Started guide it says download Microsoft Azure Site Recovery Provider. Now the Site Recovery Provider is just the thing that plugs into SCVMM and gives it the capability to do what we're about to do. So I've already taken the liberty of downloading that and getting it over here. So if I double click on that, I think I need to probably close the SCVMM window first. So I'm going to go ahead and close out a SCVMM, and then we're going to double click on this and get that piece of it started here. Alright, so I did a pre-check, made sure that we have everything we need. Stop the VMM service. You can't continue unless you do that, so it is going to take SCVMM offline briefly while it installs the Azure Site Recovery Provider, and that set of steps is just going to take a few moments here. Now it's going to ask me, okay, well, what are we going to do to get this server registered? And we're going to connect to the internet without a proxy. We don't need one because I don't have one, but you might need one. If you have a proxy server, we're going to click Next. Now we've got this registration key, right? So we're going to go ahead and browse over to the registration key that we put out here on the desktop. So we know of each other, and we are both knowing of each other as legitimate partners in this agreement for the Hyper-V Replica. So we're going to click Next. So it's going to ask me how we want to manage the registration. I'm going to go ahead and leave sync cloud metadata so it'll keep that up. We've also got the ability to do this data protection, right? So if we do that, we're going to need a certificate, which I'm not sure if we'll do that in this demo or not, but let's just say that for sake of purposes we run across something where we need the certificate. I'm going to just dump that on the desktop too. So then Next, and it'll create ourselves that certificate. You'll see it appear there on the desktop just in case we need it for something. And it begins the registration process here and tells Azure that we're getting started. So the next step it mentions is prepare your resources. So it says add an Azure storage account, and then we need to download the Azure Recovery Services agent for installation on the Hyper-V server. Right? So let's see if that install completed. Yeah. So System Center was successfully registered. So now Azure knows about my SCVMM server, and that's good. So we're pretty well done with that. I'm going to go ahead and kick SCVMM back off here, just because it takes a minute on that VM to get started and running. So we'll complete the to-do steps over here. So step 2 is get an Azure storage account. And we'll go ahead and click on that. And you'll see it takes me exactly to the kind of storage account that it wants. And it needs a name, so we'll give it Azure, we'll call it Azure Storage ASA 9z.core.windows 9, right? And the location and affinity group, we don't want it in North Europe. We'll do just like the other one, US East, and do, I guess, geo-redundant. Not a lot of questions to answer here, so I click that, and it starts creating my Azure storage account. The other thing it was talking about doing was going ahead and downloading and installing the client for the HyperV server. Now, what that was talking about was the actual HyperV server, not the SCVMM server. In this case, it's 9Z Blade 2, where we have our virtual machines. It's saying, okay, we need to put a little client on him too, so that we can make this work. And I once again have gone ahead and taken the liberty of downloading the what they call the Mars agent, I guess, for our HyperV server. So just make sure we're kind of clear of the three pieces we're looking at. We're looking at the Azure Online Portal. This is in Internet Explorer, and it's out there in the cloud. Then we have our SCVMM. This is our System Center Virtual Machine Manager. It's just a VMM in my case with it's just a VM with VMM installed on it. And this is an actual physical box with a HyperV role installed that is hosting and holding onto several of the VMs that we care about and are going to run this demo through. Right? So we're going to install the agent on here. Now what this is going to do is tell HyperV how to communicate back with not only the SCVMM server, but also how to communicate up to Azure and have these handshakes where they're doing the replica target out there. Alright, so we're just going to pick the default locations. Once again, I don't have a proxy, and it's checking to make sure I got all the stuff I need, and hooray, it does. So not a lot to getting this agent on here. So there it goes. It's voila, and done, pretty much. Okay, so this is finishing up. We're going to go ahead and proceed to the registration piece. It's going to do something very similar to what we just looked at a moment ago, which was it needs that little file that we had. And we had that on our SCVMM server, so let's go grab that file again. Not the certificate, mind you, this is just the file we created up there. And so I'll now post that onto the desktop, and it should validate it, and it's now excuse me, available on the server. So that's really all we had to do to the HyperV server itself, and realistically that's all we'll need to do. This is pretty much the extent of what we do as far as configuring the service from HyperV. Pretty much everything else is going to be managed in the cloud or from the SCVMM server. So we'll skip back over to the cloud and see if it's done with what it was doing. It is done. So we've got ourselves a nice little storage location here. So you can see that we've got now a, let's find the deal it is. We've got our one Active Directory instance, and we're not actually using that in this demo. We've got our one recovery services and our one storage piece. So far, if I were to go to all items, that's the three things you'd see. So we've got our average SRV. We're going to click over here, and you can see that we've got still our to-do list up. Okay, so we've done this, we've done that, we've done the Azure storage account and the Azure, the Mars agent thing that downloaded. So then we need to configure the cloud protection. So we got to set up the protection for the VMN clouds. So you'll notice it just jumped over to protected items. Realistically, doing that step in the in the to-do list that comes up in here for the get back over there, you goofball. All right, recovery services, Azure SRV. There we go. So right here, when I click on that link, we're just going over to the protected items tab, saying we don't have any clouds configured on our registered servers. So what that means is it actually is already talking to the SCVMM server that is not in the cloud, that is just literally sitting right over not too far from me here in my own on-premises data center, and it's telling me, well, we need to configure a cloud on the SCVMM server. So how do we do that? Well, we jump back over to SCVMM, we get into the console, and you'll see there's this little thing called clouds. Well, just as easy as that, we're going to create a cloud. And what are we going to call this sucker? I guess we'll call it the 9Z cloud. or I guess we could call it Azure Cloud since that's what we're doing. AZURE 9Z Cloud. There you go, compromise. Okay, so we'll click next, and we'll see, what groups are we going to do this on, and it's going to say, well, select resources for this cloud. Actually, I don't particularly want to put all my hosts in this cloud because I just want to do that one HyperV server that I've got configured to be able to even understand what the heck that means, right? So let's cancel out of this wizard for just a moment, and let's show you how to group that up. So I'm going to take this all hosts, and I'm going to create host group, and we'll call it the cloud enabled. Why is that not typing? Cloud enabled ENABLED. There we go. So we got a cloud enabled group here, and it was 9Z Blade 2 that we configured for this thing. So we're going to right click it, and we're going to move to host group cloud enabled, and now he's going to live up in this group up here. You can see is now under there, and the kind of cool thing about that is now we just see, instead of all of the different VMs across all the different hypervisors in the environment, right, we are only now seeing the cloud enabled ones that are running on that server. And you might be able to figure out pretty easily that Azure Replica demo and Azure Replication CentOS demo are the two VMs that we're getting ready to do this magic to. So now we're going to right click the cloud again and go through that. So we'll call this the Azure 9Z Cloud, and we click next, and we say only cloud enabled, and now we're going to register that. Now it's going to find all the switches that are running on that. Not surprisingly, if I go back over to 9Z Blade 2 and look at the virtual switch manager, we have one switch called vSwitch1. It found it. It said, okay, well, what are we going to do? Are we going to bring it along? Yes, we're going to bring it along. And then it is asking about things like load balancers. I don't have any load balancers. VIP templates, there's none there. Port classifications, I've picked these before. I don't know that I really need them. We could do high bandwidth, I guess, and host management, and guest dynamic IP, local storage, and library. We don't have a library on that guy yet, so there you go. We're about done. Capability profiles, only Hyper-V, and probably don't even need half of that stuff checked, but go ahead and share that up to the cloud so that it knows that it's there. So it's going ahead at this point, and it's building the job, which is really happening in PowerShell in the background, and getting all the stuff set up for that. So we have our Azure, it's already created, there we go, Azure 9Z Cloud. So we have a cloud, and basically that's, again, kind of like a bucket. Like when we created our storage, this is kind of a different thing there. Within moments we should see that register up here in the cloud. The cloud registration piece of this happens after not only he finishes configuring this cloud that we have here, which is done, but also the next ping, I guess you could call it, that happens from Azure back to this HyperV server and picks up that configuration. So within minutes we should see the thing, actually seconds, we should see that show up back in the cloud. Although I am kind of working from the assumption that it's done. I could go to jobs here and see what it's doing. So earlier when we were looking at jobs, probably noticed that it was all compressed. We click that. So create new cloud is completed. Yeah, so sure enough, we're basically just waiting on Azure to pick up that configuration. Oh, and incidentally, when we go down here to settings, you'll notice that when we installed that little client on the SCVMM server, we got an added Azure site recovery option here. And when you click on it, you should see that you are already assigned to a particular site recovery service. So this is what happened to us after we got that. And you know what? Just occurred to me, we actually need to put things in the cloud for the cloud to be able to do anything with it, because right now it's just an empty cloud, no stuff in it. So to assign that, if I don't even remember how to do that. I think it's there's a way to go in and put that in here. And I know there are places to assign it in the VM as well. So, well, see, this one's easy. Maybe you don't have to assign the hypervisor, you just probably have to end up assigning the VM, which makes sense because it's the VM we're configuring. So you can see it's got a cloud option here. So we come in here and we see cloud, none associated to, not associated to cloud, so we would need to go ahead and assign that to Azure 9Z Cloud. And we're going to be doing 2 VMs in this case, so I've got this 08R2 VM that is 08R2 just to keep the disk footprint a little bit lower. And then I also went ahead and put this CentOS out here, so we're going to be doing that too, just to show that you can actually do these things with Linux boxes and other types of workloads. So again, properties, we need to assign this guy to the Azure 9Z Cloud. Get him out there. Looks like that's completed. Oh, and then properties of the cloud itself. Send configuration about this data to the Azure HyperV Recovery Manager. If we don't check that, protection stays disabled. So you need to turn that on as well. I know there's a wizard I've done before where it actually asked me, and I must have missed that somewhere in here. Probably this manage protection thing right here is what I missed out on. Yeah, that's what it was. So there's a manage protection wizard that I think probably kicks off after, and I must have clicked cancel. Once you install the Azure recovery piece, it should actually start this manage protection wizard automatically. Somehow I screwballed that. You'll probably get it, but you see the big cloud button up on your toolbar? That's how you get this sucker started. So the things that would not normally have already been done is the we already did the plugin, but the virtual machine wouldn't have been in a cloud yet, and it wouldn't be in a cloud published to Azure Site Recovery Service. So those 2 things would have been what we did. We did them kind of backwards. We clicked this wizard after we did that. But the things that you could do to do those manually, if you don't want to run through the wizard, is that checkbox is piece 1, and inside of each VM, that drop down is to associate it with the cloud. So now when we go out to, sure enough, there it is. Now when we go out here, it has found something, and it's not sitting there going, hey, go add a cloud. So we've got a cloud, and it's going to ask us to start configuring the protection settings, so click that. And it says select a target. Okay, well, target sounds pretty much what it sounds like, right? We're going to make the target be Azure, right? Because we want to store our replicas in the cloud. Alright, and so as you can see, I told you it's just your regular old MSDN subscription that it's asking about here. The storage account, which we've already created. I'm not going to bother with encryption right now, just to make the demo a little easier. Copy frequency, if you remember from my other videos, you can do 30 seconds, 5 minutes, or 15 minutes. That 15 minute obviously got added in 08 or 2012 R2. Your options before were just 5 minutes, and there was no capability to change that. I'm going to go ahead and stick with the 5 minutes because, well, I really don't care about this VM as much as I make it sound like it is. And just like in my previous demos as well, recovery points. And if, as a quick reminder, this is how many snapshots it's going to keep. So, yes, DR is great and all, and you come in and the data center burned down, you can turn on your VMs and get core services back online. But in the example that I gave before, in the What's New in Windows Server 2012 video, and then the follow-on for Beta 2012 R2, was what might happen is a virus sweeps through the data center, or somebody does a script configuration changes and just knocks everything offline. You might want to roll back a few hours, right? And as you can see, you get 24 hours worth of VSS, or not VSS, just standard VM snapshots that you could roll back to, so that if you ever needed to come back and roll back when you do your wizard for recovery, that you could actually pick a different snapshot to recover to. If we had application consistent VSS snapshots, we could keep some of those as well. I'm trying to keep my storage low because my credit status is already almost used up. Replication start time is, in my case, I could say immediately. I'm going to go ahead and get that kicked off. But as you can see, if I don't want that to happen, if I just want it to happen like tonight at sometime this evening when people have already gone home for the day and not suck up all the bandwidth sending virtual machines out across our limited, internet connection, then there you go. Okay, so we've got this guy configured. This is the first of our little Jesse's we're going to kick on, and we'll say yes, I want to go ahead and do that. And you can see it kicks off this job, configuring protection for Azure 9Z Cloud. And so that's going. So let's jump back a step here and take a look at the virtual machines. Or we could jump back out to the cloud and just try to kick off the wizard again. There we go. Okay, Azure Replica CentOS. Let's go ahead and give it Linux. Azure Replica demo. That's Windows. Enabling protection for virtual machine replica demo. Yeah, well, it is changing now, so now we can see protection errors because it hasn't fully set up. Jumping between no errors, and here, as you can see, this one, CentOS, hasn't been done yet, so we should probably start to see, yeah, there we go. Now we're synchronizing, enabling protection, let's view the job. There we go. So it took about, I guess, according to its telling on itself, it says it took about 5 minutes, but it looks like in reality it took about 45 seconds. So we've got the protection enabled for Azure Replica demo. That's the Windows one. Actually, it probably could be on that set for a while. If it has completed successfully, it's probably starting the replication. So we could do that by going back here to this Protected Items tab. And you can see we've got one VM now showing up with the target as Azure. Current location should be listed in here. Okay, yeah, so it shows 1% synchronized and active location, Z Cloud. Yep, okay, so we got a VM. It did work. Let's go back to the HyperV server and see if it sees it. Yep, sure enough, there it is. Alright, so just like if we had done this on-premise to on-premise as we did in previous demos, you can see the Azure Replica demo, the first one we kicked off, it's sending its initial replica. So it's at 1%. It's a fairly large VM. Well, it's really not that big. It's like 12 or 13 gigs, but it's going to take it a while to get up there. CentOS is a little bit smaller, and so we might go ahead and kick that off as well. And we should see Replica demo. Yeah, so it's enabling as the protection status now. That'll obviously change a little bit as this flies along. So protection errors, also showing no errors on the protection errors. And we can see the status either from the SCVMM console, the HyperV console, or from up here in Azure. So let's just pile this on and go back to the virtual machines we have. I can add a virtual machine. So you see the only selection option I have here is the CentOS, because we've obviously already enabled it for the other guy. So we'll go ahead and pick Linux and click the checkbox and get that one started. And now it's going to say Azure Replica CentOS demo is beginning. And so that one is going to go into the jobs, I'm guessing. See, starting to get used to this this console. There we go. So that's where I wanted to go before and see the process. So what have we done? We've checked for prereqs, we've identified the target, and now it's enabling replication. Then it'll start the sending initial replica. And so we go back to enabling protection on this guy. We can set and watch both of the jobs in the protected items, because once the other one gets going, it'll appear in here along the other, and we should be able to see both of them. So he's synchronizing. He's already into the first percent of synchronization, so those are going to take a little while to do because there are several gigabytes that need to get transferred across the interwebs. So I'll go ahead and stop the video right on this screen, and rather than having hours of you seeing fast forwarded percentages of these things going up, I will continue the video once we have a full synchronization, and we'll take a look at what we have, and we will also take a look at what options we get once the things are sitting up in the cloud. Okay, and now all of the jobs have completed. We have 2 protected virtual machines, so it's probably a good time to kind of step back and look at all the pieces to this puzzle so that we don't get confused about where we are or what we're doing. So I'm going to switch back over here. Let's start with this blade. The blade obviously is our hypervisor. This is the HyperV server that has our 2 VMs on it, just like anything that you would normally do, right? And so from the hypervisor side, just the standalone HyperV server, we do have the replication tabs down here for both of these, showing that it is Replica server going out to Azure. It's showing that replication health is normal. So at a glance, just like we could before in the demos that I gave you in the previous episodes about doing this on premises, we have kind of a health snapshot here. You can also see that replication health tab, which if you remember from before, does not show up visible, and you kind of have to slide this little thing around to see it. Not applicable for most of these VMs, but for the 2 that we set up, those are right here. We can also see that right-clicking on this and going to the replication tab, we get a couple of additional options, including view replication health. Now, if you have been following this video series on the Replica from on-premises and pre 2012 R2 and how it looked before and how it looked after in the beta and then the full release, we had more options here. We could control more pieces of this. If you remember when we were looking at the primary host, we had things like initiating a planned failover, and from the primary copy, the source virtual machine, we could do a number of other things, but with it being controlled in the cloud now, most of that has been handed off into other places. So we'll cover those in a moment. So we've got pause replication and view replication health, and those are the 2 things you can do with this virtual machine from here, right? So as you can see, we've had 200, almost 300 successful replication cycles, and obviously if you were to do the math, you'll know that I'm continuing this video after a couple of days. There was some other stuff that came up in my world and wasn't able to continue filming from your point from a few minutes ago. About 2.5 minutes ago for you was probably about almost a week for me. So anyway, successful replication cycles, we've had a bunch. We can see 100%. Everything is very healthy coming out there, so we're good, right? So same thing on this guy right here. He is the 2008 or the 2012. I can't remember what we did with him. I think we had a 2008 with him. Yeah, 2008 for sure. So not a lot you can do from the hypervisor side here. From Hyper-V itself, you pretty much are assumed if you're using SCVMM, if you're using Azure, you're probably not actually having to log onto this box to manage your VMs as much. So let's go look at that from the SCVMM side. So remember, we created our cloud, and we created a cloud called Azure 9Z Cloud and enabled it for the capability to replicate out into the Ether out to Azure. Properties on the 2 VMs that we moved into this cloud are under this managed protection, and there's not a lot of options here. So we've got the Azure site recovery enabled, and you can see that we're sending these replicas every 5 minutes, and that's really about all that happens from the system center side of this, right? That control is mostly up in Azure. So let's go look at the Azure piece next. So we're switching up to Azure now, and here are once again our 2 virtual machines that we have syncing out to the cloud. And from a home page view, you can see that we've just got a really simple Azure setup here. We've got the storage account where we're keeping this stuff, and we've got the Azure 9Z site recovery vault, and then we've just got a directory that we really don't even need because we didn't even put it together. When we click on that and we go into protected items here, you can see the Azure 9Z cloud, which marries up to the SCVMM cloud. which is where we put the 2 virtual machines and then configured them for replication. So what can we do from here? Well, you can see that by selecting each of these, there are some options down at the bottom. So just like before, when I was doing the previous demos, we had the capability to test our DR plan, which is a very important thing to do. So let's talk about that kind of as the next step. So the CentOS is the smallest one, so we'll go ahead and kick a test failover job off. So let's look and see what that looks like. So we're going to go ahead and click test failover. It's going to ask me to attach to a network. Now, I'm not going to attach it to any network, because if I'm testing a virtual machine in a DR scenario and not actually bringing DR online, I just want to make sure that the virtual machine works. What I'll probably do is go create a test network and attach all of my virtual machines to that test network. That way, when I bring them online, they don't have a chance of actually causing any damage to the service that is the live virtual machine. If they're on the same network and you bring them back up, they're going to have the same IP address and they're going to have the same name, and that's going to wreak havoc. So that's why the test failover, one of the reasons that this test failover is so cool, is this be able to bring the virtual machine online and have it come up and have that test failover virtual machine where we can do any testing we need to. You can see the status is starting the job. So while it's doing that, let's take a look at some of our other options here. So you'll notice when I click on Azure, we only have the failover option. So you might be remembering from before when I was talking about both planned failover and unplanned failovers. And with a planned failover, you have to manually shut down a virtual machine, and then you have to kind of bring the DR site up, and then once you've done that planned failover, you get a currently consistent copy of the VM. Whereas unplanned failover means the data center where you keep all your stuff, your on-premises primary data center where the VMs live on a full-time basis, is down permanently by fire or some other sort of disaster. Okay, so we actually do have both of those, they're just not prevalent right on the screen. So you click on failover, you can see that planned failover and unplanned failover are both lit up as options here. We can't do an unplanned failover because the VM is still live, but we can do a planned failover, and because this is all orchestrated through SCVMM and through the tenants, doing a planned failover of the Azure Replica demo would actually cause us to initiate a shutdown and kick off a full scripted, just taken care of. You click that button and run through the wizard, it's going to do that. So we'll walk through that here in a minute as well. But we want to look over for so before we look at the next options I wanted to show you, you'll see that once it gets ready, it says it's waiting for action. Okay, so we told it to go do that, so it's waiting for us. So I click on this waiting for action, and you'll see that it's up to, it's prepped, it's created a virtual machine, and it's starting the virtual machine, and it'll actually wait for us on the completed testing. So it's not actually to the point where we can do anything useful with it just yet. So we'll continue to look through some of the stuff we can do here. So one of the things that introduced in this Azure piece is called a recovery plan. So we've been using this protected items page to get to the VMs that are on here, but there's also a tab called recovery plan where we can go and decide how we want things to go on. So we might call this full DR, right? Full disaster recovery. And in this case, we would be taking any of the source VMs from the SCVM and 9Z local and targeting them at Azure. We could do an on-prem to on-prem with the same wizard, but that's not what we're doing here. We're doing an on-prem to cloud backup. Click next and tell it what virtual machines are going to be in this recovery plan. We'll go ahead and throw them both in there. Click OK, and we've got ourselves a recovery plan. Now, what can we do with the recovery plan? It's something you could do some scripting with, but it's all actually pretty just right out there for you. Let me show you what this looks like. So let's click on full DR. So if you can see that it's already built us some jobs. So all groups shut down, and that's going to initiate the shutdown in the on-premises data center. All groups fail over, and then group 1 start. So it's going to kick off these two. You can even do some cool stuff like, let's say that I don't want the Replica demo to start before the CentOS demo, because maybe there's some dependency inside of the this VM that it needs to have that VM on, or maybe this one's really important and I need it to be on before all of these other VMs start kicking on. I can just create another group, and we see that that's called group 2. I might take this Replica demo and move it over to group 2. And then what will happen is this one will start, and then that one will start, and then we save that, and there we go. And there we are. Now we have a nice little failover recovery plan, right? So with the failover recovery plan, you'll notice that when we have it highlighted in this recovery plan's actions, I can do a planned failover, a test failover, and an unplanned failover of the whole group all at once, and it's all automated, and it just comes up and it takes care of itself. So pretty neat there. We also have some other resources we won't have a lot of time to get into today, but this is where you can take your networks and marry them. I don't have any custom networks created up here in Azure yet, but you can see where I can take a source location for networks and target location that at Azure. You also see where you can map this out, and that's where this comes in. There's also the servers where you can map these together, so I could map the SCVMM servers all here, and if I had you need to renew the certificate, that's where that page is. On the server storage itself, so you can see that we have source and target locations for mapping storage and networks, and this is where you can make your DR plan your own. For some folks, they're going to have some extra work to do, because with Azure there is no support for static IP addresses, so you're going to need a way for you to map addresses to what's going to happen in the Azure cloud. And if you're using Azure and virtual machines in Azure already, you already know kind of how that works. Using a reservation for a DHCP, you can't turn on a static IP for a server inside of Azure, but what you can do is have a static reservation for an IP in there. So all of that stuff a little beyond the scope of what we're going to do in this video, because that gets into some fairly intense setups. Or I wouldn't say intense, it's really easy to set up, but what it is it's going to be no good for me to show you how I do it, because you're going to have a completely different scenario when you set yours up. Okay, so we should be to the point where our test failover is ready to go. Yep, there it is. Okay, so it says test failover ready, waiting for action. Let's see what action step it's on. Okay, so complete testing is the action. Now we make that decision, right? So it's going to sit here with waiting for action until we tell it that we're done with all of our testing, right? So if I were to go home, expected to see virtual machines there. I was thinking that during a test failover that's where that went, but maybe I'm not coming from memory here. And oh, something just changed. Oh, virtual machines. All right, so evidently you need to give it about 5 minutes or so. The virtual machines will get populated. Apparently it doesn't just happen. I guess your screen has to refresh or something. So there we go. Azure Replica CentOS demo test. All right, so here is the dashboard. Now, since I took the CentOS and did a test on it, there's not a whole lot I can do with this guy, because, well, he's CentOS and I can't remote desktop to him. So perhaps a more interesting test in this scenario would be to actually get the Windows virtual machine to do a test failover. So we'll work through that real quick. So I'll do a test failover just like we did here before, and we'll go ahead and say none to the network, and we'll get that started. I'll pause the video, and once we have both of them sitting and waiting for us to look at them, we'll kind of take a look at the two VMs that are in our we're doing our DR testing today, right? And that's the scenario that we're doing in this part of the video. So then we'll take a look at what that's going to look like. And while we're doing that, we'll go ahead and look at some of the properties, since we hadn't completely finished doing the full tour of all of the pieces and parts. So there's not a lot that you do on the virtual machine itself. One thing that you can is take these virtual machine sizes You can see that by default I've got an extra small um, footprint for this virtual machine, but we could just as easily have given it larger VMs. I don't have a whole lot of credit on my Azure account, so the smaller the better for me. But they've got 1x2s and they've got 1x1s. They've got what they like to call 4x8s and 2x4s, as if you were buying lumber. But that's how they're all classified, and that's the biggest things that you would actually configure from inside of here. Alright, so test failover is in progress. You can always check the status of that by clicking here. You can see it's creating the test virtual machine, and as we saw before, that is not going to immediately show up in the virtual machines category over here. So, alright. Well, we'll wait until that shows up over here where we can play with it. See, this is bizarre too, and a little bit different than the last time. So when we created the CentOS test, it didn't show up right away in virtual machines. And maybe it's because I didn't open the virtual machines page right away, and now we're actually sitting in the virtual machines page. So Azure apparently already knew about this, but it's still retrieving status because it's still going through. All right, so anyway, we were doing our quick walkthrough. So we've pretty well beaten up the Azure Site Recovery Vault and all the pieces right there. The storage piece, there's not really a whole lot here, but we do have, where is my container? There it is, containers tab. So you can see we have several different containers. This is where Azure is storing things. And with Azure, it's treated just a teeny tiny bit different than when we're doing two on-premises HyperV Replica setups, where you see a turned off virtual machine for your Replica target, whereas Azure pretty much just kind of keeps it here in a storage blob, and you can see they're called blobs. The point being that if you are if you're accustomed to on-premises then what you're going to be expecting is to see the virtual machine itself sitting inside of virtual machines, but that's not actually how it works here. So you'll just see that as a piece of storage, and you'll monitor it through the Site Recovery Vault. Okay. I'm going to pause the video there for a minute. Alright, so can't remember exactly where we were, but I think we've finished talking about storage blobs and where you find this stuff. So we want to test this. We want to go in and test our DR plan. So we need to be able to do that in a fairly interesting way. There's a lot of stuff like on CentOS, you could like SSH into it, but I'm going to show you how to do what's probably most common for you, which is I need to be able to get in and test that this virtual machine that is now running as a test of my VM that is being sent copies of from my production forest, right? So this guy right here, server 2008 R2, which is still on, still sending copies up to Azure 2008, is still also in the where's my recovery service? There it is, recovery services. So he's still getting copies of this thing, right? So the protected items will still show healthy Azure cloud that we go. So this is still protected. There's nothing different about this just because we're doing a current test of the DR. So you see replications enabled. If I go in here and look at the health, you can see that less than 5 minutes ago we had the data replicated, and this is continuing to to do its thing, right? So this is just a wholly separate deal going on when we look at these virtual machines. This is strictly for my test. So how do I get to it? Right? I don't have a connect button down here. So how do I get in? Easiest way to do that is go into endpoints. I'm going to create a new endpoint by clicking add, standalone in this case just for simplicity, and you can pick all sorts of stuff. Like if this was that CentOS, we'd be using SSH. We're going to be using remote desktop, just TCP 3389, blah blah blah, click a checkbox and you're done, right? So it takes a couple of seconds for it to add that endpoint, and once the endpoint is there, there's going to be no longer a grayed out remote desktop, and I can come back here, and with that server highlighted, once it's finished updating and finished reconfiguring that virtual machine and attaching the endpoint to it, we're going to be able to remote desktop into that disconnected, or if we had chosen to do so, create a network. And let's say, why would we create a network on a DR test? Well, let's say there are 3 servers that are important in order for this, to know for sure that our DR site in fact has all the core services we need to bring whatever our users need from us in the event of a problem in the production data center. If we have all 3 of those, we'd need to connect all 3 of them into the network. And since that's obviously going to take a couple seconds, okay, there we go. So now I just click connect. You see that's highlighted. It's asking me, do I want to update or save? We'll go ahead and do a save as, because it's it's going to be interesting to look at that. So I'm going to open this folder, and we're going to look at this guy. Instead of just connecting directly to him, you can see that we've got the connection data here on how I'm going to get to that server, right? And gotta imagine that we've got, nope, it's not a remote desktop gateway, it's just that's how we're going to connect to it. And I'm going to turn, the other reason I did this was so that I could turn the display settings down, since I'm not capturing the entire stream here. You could get in and make sure your smart cards are connected if you're actually using that for your logon. So pretty much all you need is that part right there. So you could take these properties and put it in your remote desktop connection manager, or terminals if you prefer. That's kind of my new way of doing that. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a /administrator, because we haven't joined this to the domain or anything like that. And click OK. And we should be able to just remote desktop straight into, didn't like my username and password. Let's try that again. /administrator. And maybe I used a different password for that virtual machine. If I did, I may not be able to remote desktop into it. No, it looks like it's going to take it this time. Alright, so it's handing me a self-signed certificate that I don't trust. That's why I got that warning. That's video for another day if you don't like that message coming up. Alright, and here we are. We are into our handy-dandy copy of the virtual machine. It's fully functional. Obviously not currently connected to a usable network, although you can see that it does see itself actually connected to something, but it isn't connected to like the CentOS one. So how would we have done that? Well, very simply, we would go through and go down to, not surprisingly, networks, and we would create a virtual network, and we'd call it blah, and we stick it in Eastern US where that VM is, and next, and we could give it DNS servers, or just say now use Azure's DNS. We could give it some additional subnet ranges, or even change this, instead of an 8-bit, maybe I just want a 24-bit subnet, and 24, there it is, and maybe we want the starting IP to be like 10. Actually, I'd do that too. So now I've got my IP range that I can use for stuff right there. And then when we would have created the replica test DR, we would have attached all of the VMs that were necessary to, well, my phone is blowing up today. We would have attached to that, and then we could have done a real DR test. Okay, so next piece of that is kind of following in line with the same types of demos that we did when we were doing this on the on-premises piece of this. So we've got our I'm in cloud services, not virtual machines, so I can't find anything here. Alright, so we are finished pretty much with this test. So we've got we need to go to the Recovery Services tab, and we need to come in here to Protected Items, and we need to tell it that we are done testing. So you see it says test failover waiting for action. I say complete test, and what that means is our DR test was happy, And now I'm going to say test failovers complete, clean up the test environment. All that means is, hey, thanks for the VM that you created. That was awesome, but I don't need it anymore. And we'll go ahead and do that. This is for the CentOS. We'll go ahead and do the same thing on our other protected item here, the non-CentOS version, the 2008 R2. So this is this guy. We'll go ahead and tell him to clean that up too. Complete test failures complete. And over the process of the next few minutes, it's going to go ahead and delete those virtual machines, not the protected ones, just the test VMs that got snapped into action, just like we did when we were doing this on premises. So you can see this really follows the same kind of concept when we're doing the Azure side of it. All the functionality really is still here. You just control it from this nice little handy cloud interface, rather than controlling that whole piece from inside of HyperV or even potentially through SCVMM, which we didn't cover in the previous demos. All right, so I'm going to see this finish its progress, and we'll move on to a couple of additional items that we can do. I just don't want to kick off I don't want to kick off any kind of failovers and stuff like that until that's completed. As you can see, it really doesn't give me the option to do that anyhow. So I'll pause the video for a minute until it is finished with its cleanup of the test failover, and we'll go on to the last couple of things that you can do with this technology. And now it shows protected and failover status is ready. You'll see that just now these options lit themselves back up because it has completed the cleanup of the test failover. So now we have the option for failover. So if we were to do a planned failover, as opposed to doing this on premises, it's going to automate this process for me. So I'm going to say go ahead and move it from my on-premises to Azure, and you can see it's starting that process. And it should actually begin to shut down the CentOS here momentarily, because we've told it, hey, we're doing that. Note that I will not actually have to do that, at least in the previous version didn't. So I'm going to click failover in progress just so we can see the things that it's going to do. So it's checking prereqs now, and then it's going to shut down the virtual machine, and then it's going to prepare the failover, start the failover, and then start the replica virtual machine up. And when that's finished, we should have a virtual machine that we can view. So I'm going to do a time lapse at this point in the video and let you kind of watch that progress as it moves along. I was speaking on mute. Not real useful. What I was trying to say was, hey look, it turned off the CentOS demo. It even said it did that, so we're now up to this point in the process where it starts the failover. So more fast forwarding. Okay, so this process is now completed. We have a planned failover, which has finished out on our CentOS. So what we would now see is a live running replacement of that. Again, just to come back over here, this one's off. Why would you do this? Well, we knew the data center was going out. We wanted to move that out to Azure to continue providing services. We had some downtime associated with that, obviously. Which, once again, this is not high availability. This is all about our capability to do the... those should have cleaned up. I wonder why those haven't. I think I need to refresh that. Anyway, we do have our active VM. It does appear that Azure has not kind of caught up to that yet. So in our recovery services, however, we should see a protected items, and we should see that under Azure Cloud. When we look at this guy, he is waiting for a commit. That's what it is. Okay, so the commit is waiting. We are at the point now where, and I forgot about this step, my apologies. Once you have done a failover, you have to commit the failover. You'll notice the commit button has been replaced. The failover button has been replaced by commit. We haven't done the 2012 or the 08R2 VM. We did the CentOS. So what we do is we say commit, and we're saying, are you sure you want to commit the failover for Replica demo? And we say yes. And now it's starting the commit process on that, and that's going to take a few minutes, so we'll catch up to that here after a bit. I'll pause the video. Alright, it went from starting the job and now shows ready. So this CentOS demo, if we look at its properties, we can see the last failover information is now up to date and showing operating system disk Linux and active. So now we have both of them showing protected and ready. Okay, so after about a minute or so, we should see the virtual machines catch back up. So we'll go into VMs, and you'll notice that it has refreshed, and we have lost the two test guys, and now we have the Azure Replica CentOS demo up and running here. So this is a running virtual machine, just like our test a moment ago, except the big difference, of course, here being we now have the CentOS going, so I can't remote desktop obviously to a Linux system, but now it's running in the cloud and picking up all of its services and running from here. So the other one is an unplanned failover. That is the other option that we get from those two, and so we'll take a quick look at that, although that isn't too spectacularly different. So we'll go into protected items, we'll look at the other one. An unplanned failover, as we've discussed previously, is we didn't have a planned service outage. We had an unplanned service outage, whatever that might be. Once again, the example of the data center that burned to the ground. So we're going to do an unplanned failover of the other one, and we'll start the wizard here from this. And you'll notice that it does actually have the option for shut down virtual machines and synchronize the latest data, which basically makes this a planned failover. It's giving me this option because it's still up. That virtual machine is still capable of doing its thing, right? So we could click OK, and you'll notice that it's basically just running a planned failover. So here in a moment, it's going to shut down the Replica demo, and it's going to go through the process that we just watched. And the big difference here is, what would have happened if we had instead shut that virtual machine down. It's the only real difference. If we do not have the ability to shut it down remotely, which wouldn't have given me the option if it did, we would potentially have lost as much as 5 minutes worth of transactions or data or whatever that virtual machine does, right? Because obviously over here, he's doing his where's his settings? There we go. He's doing his replication at 5 minutes. So if I had set that to be 30 seconds instead, we would have lost 30 seconds. If I had it at 15 minutes, it could potentially be upwards of that. So if it had a 15-minute window, and it was at 14 and a half minutes ago was the last time that it sent its HRL file update up into the Azure cloud, anything that had happened in that period of time, we would lose. And that's the only real big difference as far as a planned failover or an unplanned failover. But I think it's kind of nice here. If you're doing on-premises to on-premises, it'll warn you. It'll say, hey, the VM is still up, so I can't do an unplanned failover, and you have to go shut it down yourself. And then it really kind of becomes a planned failover. If the data center had been offline, then skip all of those frustrations, and we just go straight through the wizard and we get it there. So this will be exactly like the one we did before, so I'm just going to pause the video and then we'll attach to it and show that that VM is now running in the cloud. And then we'll look at some of the other options that we have. And actually, it just occurred to me we don't have to wait for this one to come back online for us to move on to the next step, because we do have one that's already moved over. So we'll let it continue doing its thing. What we'll move on to is kind of the last major step here, is what happens when, hey, the data center has come back up, we had a major power failure, or whatever the scenario may be here, but the data center was recoverable and it did come back up. So we're ready to move our failed over CentOS back to the main data center, and since it's up, prepared, and ready to go, we should have an option when I click on failover to do a planned failover. So we're going to fail this back to our production data site the same way that we went the other direction before. So we get a couple of options here. So we're doing a planned failover from Azure back to our on-premises data center, and you'll get the option to do a synchronized data before we do the failover, or we can just do it while it's going on. So it's just a matter of how balancing downtime with the synchronization time. So we'll go ahead and do it the safe way with the minimized downtime. Get that kicked off and going. So you can see it's starting the job. I'm going to go ahead and dismiss the completed items here. So we've got two things going. We've got one going one way and we've got one going the other way, all at the same time here. So once it gets past starting the job, we should be able to click on it and see the progress. Actually, we'll go ahead and click the progress of our other guys. So start failover is still in progress on the Windows machine. We go back here to protected items under these guys and list our VMs. And plan failover is in progress on CentOS. And as you can see, we're preparing the on-premises virtual machine. So we look over there and see that this is still off at the moment. It won't come on until it's finished the synchronization. So now we've got two that would be boring to have the video going for, so we'll just kind of move back to the main view. I'll pause the video and we'll come back in and we'll take a look and see what all we've done here in just a few minutes, because that CentOS should actually actually looks like we're ready for the next step here. So Azure Replica demo is ready for a commit. Yes, I want to go ahead and commit, and it should now build the virtual machine so that we can manage it. So again, just as a reminder, we're doing a Windows system is now coming up to Azure, and CentOS system is going back to our production data center. And so that's starting that job. This one's doing the planned failover, still initiating the data sync, getting the data, which should be a minimal amount because this is a CentOS with no production workload on it. So it shouldn't take it very long, and it should be back to our data center, and it should start that VM as soon as this gets ready to go. It's going to have a waiting for user input, looks like, as one of these steps once it gets past that, so we'll try to keep an eye on that. And we'll see where we're doing on this other guy. Alright, so Azure Replica demo shows that it is ready, and we're doing planned failover in progress on the other one. So we haven't probably had enough time to refresh virtual machines, but let's go see if it's listed yet. Yep, CentOS is still here, so from before, it does seem to take about 2 or 3 minutes before, after doing the failover, that it actually shows up in the main screen here. So we'll check the status of all of these. So successfully completed unplanned failover of Azure Replica demo. Click OK. And as you can see, some things are starting here. We now have more virtual machines listed there, and sure enough, there it is. Okay, so Azure Replica demo is now running. It is up, it is in the cloud, and our workload is ready for whatever people need to attach to it. We may do some configuration before, we may have to do some things to the VM. So since this is a Windows system, we'll attach a remote desktop endpoint. That only takes a few seconds, so I won't pause for that part. And it's up. So now when I come back to virtual machines and see these guys listed, running, updating the configuration, running, and ready. So now we should be able to do the same thing we did before. The only real difference here obviously is that we are connecting to a virtual machine that is now production. And this is a VM that was sitting in my data center here in my lab, and now is a virtual machine that is sitting up in Azure cloud. We call this an IaaS type of workload, infrastructure as a service. So it's a virtual machine that is sitting on Azure's HyperV servers, and there it is, up and running and happy. Alright, so let's check the status of that other job and see where we're at. We'll take a look also at locally. So failback replication has now started. We can see under the status for the CentOS, it's at 22%, so we're getting closer and closer for getting to the state that we can say we have failed back from the DR site. So we'll go down to our cloud, or not cloud, our recovery services, and take a look at the protected items under our Azure 9Z cloud. And planned failover in progress. We'll go check the status of that. So it's monitoring data synchronization. We're almost up to the waiting for user input piece of this. While we wait for that, let's look at the HyperV server and talk about what is now possible here. This is now failed out of the DR site. So when I right click on it, the only option I have inside of the replication is the view replication health setting. Right? So we can see that we have now 165 of 167 replication cycles that are complete. There's really not any actions we can do from here. Once you commit to managing this from the cloud, you really will be managing most all of the actions from up in the cloud. So we'll once again wait for this to complete. I see now that the CentOS no longer shows a replication, so it is still at the monitoring data synchronization step here. So hopefully as soon as it picks up that HyperV has completed receiving all changes and committed those changes into the on-site virtual machine, which it doesn't look like there's any current checkpoints showing. It should only be a matter of a few seconds before we move on to the commit option here and get it presented with the option to go ahead and let that virtual machine go. And sure enough, there it is. So we'll go ahead and click complete failover, and it says, do you want to start the failover? Yes, I do. So it's now telling the HyperV server that it's time to turn itself on and become the active copy. And let's see what we're doing. Starting the planned failover CentOS. Done with that one. Okay, it says completed for the user input, and now we're in progress on starting the virtual machine, so we should see that happen here momentarily. It should automatically reach out to the HyperV server and turn that virtual machine on without me having to touch it or do anything. Okay, now the status has changed back here to failback replication, and it's changed a replication state to failback in progress. Probably won't see a status change here. Yeah, so it's still saying starting virtual machine failback replication here, so we're probably moments away from getting a VM booting up and completing the process. Yeah, so now we actually have a progress indicator. We're up to 7%. Alright, we're now up to a 98%, and we're still showing in Azure doing the starting virtual machine failback, showing in progress on that. So failback replication now shows succeeded, and we should see the CentOS get a start command here within the next few seconds, hopefully. Let me go check and see what Azure sees on this. Yeah, so the two are still communicating back and forth. Looks like it's taken about 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 plus minutes, adding to that the amount of time that it takes for this. In fact, though not all of these little errors do anything, when I click on that, I can see that we actually have a little bit more detail. So prerequisites check, shut down the Azure side of the VM, initiate data sync, monitor the data sync, which is still what it's doing, and then we'll get to the prepare final failback and then starting the machine. So you see that last step took 4 minutes. We've got 7 minutes on the clock it just completed for monitoring the data synchronization, and now it's preparing for final failback. Let's see if we see any status change on the CentOS demo. Doesn't look like it's showing there, but hopefully preparing final failback doesn't take too terribly long, and we'll have a virtual machine starting up in the next little bit here. Oh, sending initial replica. So it's actually starting its replication back to make sure that the, yep, and you saw merge in progress. So that should get reported up to Azure. Once Azure sees that the final failback has occurred, it will kick off the VM start command. And so pretty quick here, we should see that kick up and boot up. And starting has succeeded. So we should see this guy going here. Yep, there's your CentOS boot screen. Okay, so I was editing the video and I realized that I did forget one minor extra piece to this, so I'm slicing right in the almost to the exit in the end of this video and putting this one little piece back in there. We'll cut right back to the Azure CentOS boot up piece here. Once you have finished, and you'll notice that we're not doing the CentOS, it's because we're not doing the 08 R2. I don't want you to confuse the fact that we were a minute ago failing back the CentOS. It's when I started failing back this one that I realized that I had actually missed a step. After it is failover committed, after we have our virtual machines, both, you know, the virtual machine that you have failed out to Azure and then failed back, or vice versa, and you've committed that manually, there's one extra piece you want to do, and that's called reversing replication. Because as of right now, this this Azure Replica demo is not actually, even though it says replication enabled and replication health is normal, and even if we were to go view the replication health, we're not actually sending our replica changes on this guy back up to replica, to the replica target inside of Azure. So there's one additional piece. We have to go tell that virtual machine that we want it to continue to use this as our, if you will call it a backup, as our replica target. So once I click reverse replica, I click yes, and it starts that process. And once this is done, we're right back to where we were right after we had gotten both of these kicked off. So once again, primary data center, or my on-prem data center, is now hosting both of the virtual machines, and Azure is now the replica target for both of these, and that'll take it just a minute. But we'll also notice that if I go to virtual machines, once again there are no VMs that actually show up here, because a replica target on a HyperV server on-prem to on-prem would show up as a powered off virtual machine, but in Azure it's a little different. You won't expect to see your virtual machines actually listed as actual active VMs inside of your infrastructure there. So he's enabling his protection, he's reversing the replication, he's sending the message to this guy to, hey, start sending me changes again, and once that's all completed, then your fail back from your DR site will be complete. I did that a minute ago on the CentOS, took about 3 minutes. I'm not going to sit here and make you watch that for 3 minutes, but I wanted to add that in before I closed out this video, make sure that I did get that last piece. So we continue on to where I had cut from the video. As I said, so what we've done is we've created an Azure storage space, and then an Azure SRS, and then we've configured a couple of virtual machines, one Windows and not Windows, that have sent their replica targets up into the Azure cloud. Then we've done a test replication where we test our backup and DR scenario, our disaster recovery, business continuity disaster recovery plan. We've done both a planned failover and an unplanned failover from our on-premises data center up into the Azure cloud. And then we've failed one of the virtual machines back into our primary production data center to show a process of coming back out of the cloud and back onto on-premises. So hopefully this gives you at least a gateway of getting into Azure and to start using some cloud services. I think this is for those who are not ready to fully move to the cloud. This is one of many things that you could actually use your Azure getting the foot in the door and kind of seeing what it's like to have some of your infrastructure in the cloud. I think it's important that we all start getting used to that, because there's a lot of movement in IT these days to do that. And even as a personal thing for careers, it's not a bad idea for you to be able to go on your resume and say, hey, in our previous job, yeah, we worked with Azure, we worked with on-premises, we had some private cloud and public cloud deployments for various things, and so you'll be familiar with the interface, even if it's just a small portion of what Azure can do. Anyway, I certainly hope that you guys have enjoyed this. It's been Chris with Microsoft, and as always, thank you for watching. If you did find anything about this video useful or interesting, please give it a quick like. It really helps me to know what kind of content people are appreciating out there. Also, feel free to subscribe to my channel. That way you'll get notifications whenever I've got a new video that I've put out. Also, my blog is at 9z.com. It's real easy to remember. It's just the last number and then the last letter.com. It's got links to my Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter on there as well. Anyway, so again, thanks a ton for listening, and I will see you all in the next episode.